3 Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorists who stormed the BSF camp near the Srinagar airport were killed by Indian security forces after a massive operation. One assistant sub-inspector of the BSF was martyred in that attack. Raghvendra Rao has the blow-by-blow account of what happened.
A 9-hour-long gun battle was what it took to neutralize the 3 Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorists who had infiltrated the 182nd Battalion camp of the Border Security Force in Srinagar in the wee hours of Tuesday. But security forces have reason to believe that there are 4 more JeM cadres still roaming free in the valley and plotting another Fidaiin attack. The BSF battalion camp that came under attack today is located close to Srinagar's international airport in the Humhama area of Budgam district. And while security agencies maintained that the airport was not the target, the possibility of them using the camp as a base to launch an attack on the airport was not being ruled out completely. The 3 terrorists who had been gunned down today had been spotted in a black Alto car on the Pulwama-Budgam border late Monday night. 2 of them were clad in BSF uniform, while the 3rd was in civilian clothing, sources said. Early this morning, these terrorists used a wire cutter to cut the perimeter wire of the BSF camp to gain access. Sources said the wire cutter appeared to be a brand new one. As soon as the terrorists entered the backyard of the subordinate officers' mess, they dispersed in different directions. One ran towards the administrative block, the second towards the mess, and the 3rd made a run for the canteen. It was then that the 3rd, who was in civilian clothing, was challenged by a BSF sentry. Sources said that the intruder responded by firing a burst, but was swiftly overpowered by the sentry. The other 2 managed to enter the administrative block and the mess respectively. It was in the mess that one of them killed the BSF assistant sub-inspector, but before he could cause more damage, he was overpowered by JCOs who snatched his weapon and neutralized him. Meanwhile, the other terrorist opened fire in the admin block, injuring an exchange operator and 2 to 3 other BSF personnel. One of the BSF men took a bullet in the abdomen. This terrorist was finally neutralized when he tried to escape the block by running away. The 3 JeM terrorists were heavily armed. They were carrying AK-47s and Pakistani-made Shaheen pistols. A US-made saber knife with a compass was also recovered from the body of one of the terrorists. Raghvendra Rao, WION.
Joining me tonight is Lieutenant General Ata Hasnain, the former GOC&C 15 and 21 Corps, the military secretary, and now, of course, a well-known public speaker, strategic analyst and author. Joining me from WION's newsroom is our senior correspondent, my colleague Raghvendra Rao, who in fact filed that report for us. Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you both for joining us here on the broadcast tonight. General Hasnain, I want to ask you this question because it comes up very often. How serious is the access and availability of military fatigues when it comes to the carrying out of these brazen attacks?
Aisha, this has been a problem, I can assure you, right from the 90s. And when the Fidaiin type of operation started for the first time in 1999, I was there at Avantipur in the Victor Force headquarters. And we were hit by this all over the valley. And it was very difficult for us to discern, for the troops to discern between a terrorist and a normal soldier. To the extent that the terrorist came wearing the uniform with the full regalia, writing RR on it, and carrying this almost the same weaponry, the same kind of headdress. So it became very difficult. We made a lot of efforts that time to try and legally put a ban on this type of clothing, this uniform and this kind of equipment. No, that has not been possible. There is a requirement for district magistrates in different districts to actually impose this order from time to time. And my experience is that every 3 months, you have to keep reminding the administrative authorities in different districts to do it. Unfortunately, it does not happen automatically. And yet, in letter and spirit, the implementation is extremely poor. And this is one of the reasons why this problem has been happening on an endemic way right from the beginning. And I don't think we can really find an answer to it.
Sure. Raghavendra, going by what the General has just told us, this has been a problem facing security forces since the early 90s. How many attacks do you think it's going to take for the powers that be to recognize that this is a problem, that perhaps the dragging of feet over this situation has led to the perpetuation of these attacks, and we've seen so many of them in the recent past itself?
Well, absolutely, Aisha, and not just the easy availability of these uniforms which are worn by security forces, but also the fact that perimeter security continues to be of utmost concern here. Now, this was a BSF camp, a heavily guarded area located very close to the Srinagar International Airport. Now, that area, anybody who has been there would know that this area is one of the most guarded areas as far as the entire valley is concerned. More so, a BSF camp, cutting the wires through a wire cutter and getting inside the perimeter of a BSF camp. That also just goes on to show, that probably the perimeter security left much to be desired, because it's very inexplicable, the manner, the ease with which these men were able to just use a wire cutter to cut some wires and get inside a BSF camp and then move to different locations within the camp. All those questions, they need answers. Every time a thing like this happens, we talk of standard operating procedures, we talk of do's and don'ts. But clearly, I mean, today's incident, these three terrorists were neutralized in the end, but it could have been much worse.
Absolutely. General Hasnain, beyond the access to and the abuse of military fatigues, you've seen this close up from a personal level. Can you help us understand how exactly Fidayeen attacks operate, and what is the challenge that security forces have to face in dealing with them?
I've had a fair amount of experience in dealing with this. And let me tell you, this is the word Fidayeen obviously comes from the Palestinian vocabulary or the Arab vocabulary. It is primarily almost like a lone wolf, but in this case there are normally 2 to 3 or 4 terrorists who get together. They are tasked properly for it. My experience of the late 90s, the early part of the millennium, and even up to 2010-11 sometimes, shows me that they are well trained, they are very well motivated, they are equipped to hold on. They've got adequate ammunition with them, they've got the right weaponry in the sense, lots and lots of grenades normally, lots and lots of prepared IEDs, and in terms of sustenance and logistics, you will always find lots of biscuits, chocolates and dry fruits with them, which can give them sustenance for 48 hours or more. They come prepared to die. Usually these Fidayeen attacks are not such, where you will find them strapped with the explosives, willing to come and blow themselves up. That is not the case in Kashmir. The Kashmir terrorism we have not seen cases of suicide bombing.
Sure.
But we have always seen the cases of suicide terrorism. Now these 3-4 people, their whole aim is somehow to distract the sentries, have a staggered timings. There's no fixed timing for it. I've seen these happening at 6 o'clock in the evening, at 10 o'clock at night, at 4:30 in the morning, and early hours of the morning too. What happens is they normally like to distract the sentries in the evening if it is happening, and at least 2 men make a dash inside.
Sure.
And they are normally well mapped out. They have got a mapping of the entire complex in their hands, which is well prepared, some inside job normally. And once that is available, they know which is the most important place. In this case, you've seen the officers' mess. Now, normally officers' messes or the headquarter complex, the office complex are usual targets. If not, it is sleeping men, Jawans in barracks, because they are in abundance there, and therefore the likelihood of targeting and killing a large number of them is always possible. So these are some of the things which happen in this. The problem is that preventing this is extremely difficult unless you have got a perimeter wall which is well wired on top, so which means you got like a fortress kind of a thing, and you have adequate intelligence of the area in which you are, village or township or wherever you are. You have enough informers around you who will tell you about the presence of strange people, and you have got adequate patrolling. The most essential aspect is patrolling.
Okay,
which means that you have to dominate the areas around you.
Okay, allow me to come in, General Hasnain. You're raising some very interesting points. You're saying that these are well prepared men. They come with the requisite, fodder, let's say, not just ideologically, but also in terms of sustenance to carry out these attacks. But they're also very well informed, as you're pointing out. Do you think that this prompts the bigger question of where are they getting this sort of sensitive input from, A? And B, is it also time for perhaps the security forces to refurbish the system of patrolling, the system of guard change, and how exactly these standard operating procedures are formed? Because clearly it seems like these Fidain attackers and others are very well versed with how the Indian military carries out these procedures.
Very good question. That's a very good question, Aisha. But let me tell you, this is now the experience is almost 18, 19 years. The early 90s, we didn't see too much of it. From the mid-90s and 99 onwards, particularly, we saw it. Now, you can't have a fortress mentality of putting walls around you everywhere. The methodology of defending, as I told you, the principles are very clear. The training is there. But there are lots of tired men. There are lots of people, like in this BSF camp, there must have been lots of people who were on duty the whole day on ROP. That's opening of the road protection. And they must have come back late in the evening. They must be resting in the morning, early morning at that time. There are sentries available. You cannot have every part of the complex under security. There are lots of cameras. There are lots of other devices available to you. There are sensors available. So everything to maximize your security you are doing. I agree that it's a question of refinement of drills from time to time. But despite all this, you will find that attempts will get through. Now, when it gets through, the whole aim should be to ensure minimum damage. I'm glad to see that the BSF in this case, 182 Battalion BSF, has ensured minimum damage.
Yes.
Even the loss of a single life is unfortunate and tragic. But they have eliminated these terrorists, 3 of them, in a matter of about 6 to 8 hours, which is also a slightly long time. But at least they've done it in that much period of time.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, kind of an operation can hold on for 48 to 72 hours.
Absolutely. Raghavendra, the General, bringing up that important point of fatigue as well. And let's not forget that, as you pointed out in that report, 3 of them have been neutralized, but they can't rest easy because there is that big question of how many more and where exactly they are. Does that just go to show the kind of pressures that Indian security forces are under with this continuous bombardment by, Pakistan-sponsored terrorists across the border?
That's correct, Aisha. And as we mentioned in our report, the security agencies in the valley, they are almost certain of the fact that to begin with, 10 Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorists had infiltrated into the Indian territory a few days back. Out of these, 3 were killed in the Pulwama encounter when they had stormed the district police lines. 3 were killed today. That leaves us with 4 more JeM terrorists. And the conversations I had with some of our sources in the defense establishment, they told us that these 4 men are still, roaming freely, and another Fidain attack is in the offing. So yes, being in a constant state of alert, being very, anticipating an attack all the time, that is something which becomes a part and parcel of these men who are serving the forces in the valley. And yes, it gets tiresome at times because at the end of the day, they are human beings as well. They do duties much beyond their prescribed hours of work. Fatigue is bound to set in at some point in time, and that is one challenge which the security forces has to battle.
Absolutely. General Hasnain, the other perhaps challenge that security forces need to battle is the one that you mentioned a little while earlier, and that is the support system from local sources, local supporters of these terrorist organizations. Do you feel that right now India is focusing perhaps too much on short-term answers like surgical strikes and not perhaps looking at the larger picture of addressing all of these issues simultaneously in tandem?
No, Aisha, I won't call that. I think that would be an unfair accusation. I think the Operation All Out, which has been conducted over the last 3 or 4 months, has been a resounding success. It's been a very comprehensive kind of an operation, which they have been looking at the hinterland security in different ways. And if you see that they have been able to dominate the areas adequately to the extent that the kind of ambushes we saw in the early part of this year, leading to the kind of very, very adverse ratios of casualties that we also witnessed, all that is something of the past. This has come as a one-off attack after a fairly long time. If you really look at the other operations that have happened in Uri on the 26th, 27th, you had an operation in a place called Kalgai where 4 terrorists had managed to infiltrate and were attempting to target the gun area. But they were discovered well in time and they were neutralized. Similarly, a terrorist, the famous JeM leader who was coming back and was neutralized at Lachipura. At Tangda, they stopped another movement out there. Yesterday, they have killed terrorists in Rampur. So the LOC itself is fairly well controlled. And hinterland operations are well under domination at the moment. These kind of Fidayeen operations always take place when it is Pakistan which is under pressure. When the militants are under pressure, they have to carry out a desperate act to send home a message that they are still relevant and that an operation such as All Out has not been able to achieve its strategic aims.
All right, I'm running out of time, unfortunately. Many more questions remain to be answered, but we'll have to leave it at that, gentlemen. General Atta Hasnain and my colleague Raghvendra Rao, thank you both very much for joining in on the broadcast and sharing your perspectives with us on that story, one that we will continue to look at here on WION. But we'll turn our attention now to another big story, originating from India at least. The former liquor baron and fugitive businessman Vijay Mallya was arrested by police in the United Kingdom earlier today. However, he was released on bail shortly after. The arrest was pursuant to the extradition request made by India based on money laundering charges against him. The Crown prosecution lawyer said that there was a supplementary money laundering charge that has been added against Mr. Mallya. He's been accused of fraudulently obtaining loans and diverging funds. The UK Crown prosecution lawyer added that all the money is still being traced. Mallya's defense said that he will try to respond to all the salient points in the case. His lawyer also said that he will need an updated position statement from the Government of India. The next hearing in the case has been set for the 20th of November. The UK police arrested him on April 18th this year on separate charges of fraud. He's been out on bail ever since.
You were there, you heard it all. I have nothing to add.
Mr. Mallya, the net is getting tighter and tighter on you. Do you think it's about time you should give yourself into the authorities, because eventually you might be taken back to India?
That's for the judge to decide.
Right, joining me on the broadcast right now is the senior Indian advocate Harish Salve for more perspective on that story. Good evening, Mr. Salve. Thanks for speaking with us. Do you think India is any closer after today's developments to getting Mallya extradited?
Well, this is nothing dramatic in the way it's being perceived to be there, but there is a fresh case which India seems to have filed against him. That's what it appears from the news reports, and that has been heard. So it was a standard procedure. He was arrested, taken to the Westminster Magistrates Court, where he's been released on bail.
Right, but from a layperson's point of view, if you could explain to us what exactly happened today, because it appeared almost farcical. He was arrested and released within minutes again. What exactly happened today in England?
Yeah, you see, the criminal justice system doesn't work like Bollywood movies. You know, a person is arrested. Is the first process means you surrender to the custody of the court. He is now under the custody of the court. Custody of the court can be within jail, or custody can be court where the court is convinced you're not a flight risk. He has already been given bail in the first case. He had to be given bail in the second case. The court will fix a date depending on when the CBI files the full material, when they get a chance to prepare a reply, and then the court will fix a date for hearing of the extradition proceedings. And a fair chance has to be given to him. However angry the Indian media is with him, is not going to affect the working of the English court.
Right. Thanks, Mrs. Alve. We leave it at that. Appreciate you joining us on the broadcast with your perspective. In other news, it was called a case of love jihad. The tale of Hadia and Shafeen Jahan sparked a nationwide debate in India, and now the Supreme Court is revisiting the case on the request of Jahan. Was Hadia lured into accepting Islam, or did she voluntarily pick her new religion and her husband? The Supreme Court of India will hear the case on October 9th. Here's a report. Can a High Court annul a marriage by exercising its power under Article 226 of the Constitution? Asked the Supreme Court of India. The marriage in question is that of Hadia to Shafeen Jahan. 24-year-old Hadia from Kerala's Kottayam was born Akhila Ashokan. She converted to Islam and married Jahan. Earlier in May this year, the Kerala High Court declared Hadia's marriage null and void and sent her back to her father's custody. 3 months later, the Supreme Court ordered the National Investigation Agency to investigate the circumstances under which Hadia converted to Islam. And now, in a new twist, a Supreme Court bench is revisiting the order of the Kerala High Court that annulled Hadia's marriage.
The Hadia case has sparked a heated debate, with her father now alleging that she was converted at the behest of the Islamic State. Allegations of love jihad have also emerged, which is a term used to describe the act of luring someone to convert.
But what remains unanswered is a very basic question. Can a court annul the marriage of two adults merely on the complaint of the girl's father? Bureau Report, WION. My colleague, WION's correspondent Jessica Taneja joins us live from New Delhi for more on that story. Jessica, hi. Is this stance that the Supreme Court took today a departure, let's say, from previous positions that have been taken on cases of love jihad?
Absolutely, Aisha, because if you remember, when Chief Justice of India was ASK here, he has completely different outlook. He actually went on an order, and I just understood the fact but today,
Right. Jessica, allow me to come in. We're having a little trouble hearing you with the audio connection. We'll try and fix that very shortly. But before we do that, a quick reminder to our viewers. This is, of course, the case or the purported case of love jihad dealing with a young couple in Kerala's Kottayam. Hadia is the name of the woman in question. She converted to Islam and married a young man by the name of Shafeen Jahan. However, her father alleged that she was forced into converting to Islam on the pretext of marriage. But of course, the larger implication, he said, was that she was being recruited by the Islamic State. Now, since then, there's been a change, so to speak, in stance. Remember, the Kerala High Court had annulled the marriage between Shafeen Jahan and Hadia, saying that her custody should go back to the father. But the question, of course, that remains is whether two consenting adults who've decided to walk down the path of marriage can really be questioned on the motives of their decision.